were discussing the HARP stations in Antarctica. Now, the reason I'm discussing or bringing up HARP now is because the chemtrails were an idea proposed at the Lawrence Livermore Nuclear Weapons Laboratory some time ago, and they were proposed to do chemtrails by Dr. Christophilus, who was a scientist at Livermore Lab. And he also had the idea to do nuclear bomb tests high up in the atmosphere so that they could pump lots of highly charged radioactive particles with a lot of energy into the ionosphere to study how those particles, very tiny particles, behaved in the Earth's magnetic field.
Oh, lovely.
And my PhD my research was on the history of the Earth's magnetic field. And so people didn't really know how the ionosphere works. You know, we can't exactly go up there. We did send the space shuttle up. And what the space shuttle did was to release chemicals from the back of the exhaust manifold of the space shuttle, flying around up there, and that was what the space station was for. Also, it was to spray chemtrails in the ionosphere.
Oh, lovely!
Can you believe that? So. So these ideas to get radioactive particles up into the ionosphere so that scientists could understand the mechanisms for how the ionosphere works and how to weaponize it with frequencies over the horizon radar. And it took years and years and years. And also in U.S. Air Force report, I believe it was Vision 2020 or something like that, I saw diagrams of military on the ground with transmitters, and they were shooting bouncing frequencies off of clouds that were sprayed as chemtrails up in the sky, and they act as electromagnetic mirrors. And so the military on the ground can transmit frequencies up to those clouds that are actually made with chemtrails, and then they bounce back down to the ground where transmitters are, and they're retransmitted up to the next set of electromagnetic mirrors made with chemtrails. And that's how they can transmit radar from HARP all around the world in any direction on this planet.
Oh.
And it's called over-the-horizon radar because radar goes in a straight line. It's called a line-of-sight transmission. It does not bend. And so what they have to do is spray these chemtrails up there and bounce the HARP signal off of them to make them go around the world over the horizon. And what they've put in the chemtrails, for instance, they were also shooting them from rockets up into the ionosphere. That was part of what Christophilus also proposed. And Dr. Eastland, who was the civilian scientist hired or contracted by Atlantic Richfield Oil Company, and they asked him to devise a system that they could do subsurface mineral exploration from space. Now, I'm a geoscientist, and we used to go out into the field and walk around and take rock samples and take equipment out there and do subsurface soundings and everything, but they don't do that anymore. They can map ore bodies from space, from a satellite, with a 30-watt signal. Well, 30 watts is about what is in a sewing machine light bulb. And they can penetrate 150 miles below the surface. They can scan across an ore body and map the ore grade of that entire body and identify every metal or mineral in it.
Okay.
And so these are some of the applications of the chemtrails. Now, with the chemtrails that they shot up there in rockets into the ionosphere, they had radioactive materials, they had carbon, they had other metals, all kinds of stuff. But with the chemtrails that they're spraying over countries now and over populations, the U.S. government, our Congress, has passed a bill saying it is legal to poison and kill the United States population indiscriminately with chemicals in the chemtrails.
Yeah, well.
And what they're doing here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we've had the Department of Homeland Security, which was created in right after 9/11 with the Patriot Act. And Homeland Security is based on the Phoenix program from Vietnam. And that's, by the way, when they started weather modification and chemtrails.
Yeah.
They started it in Vietnam, and it was called Project Popeye.
Yeah, cloud seeding and yeah.
Yes, all of that stuff.
Ho Chi Minh Road.
There's a history to all of this stuff. We just don't realize it.
Yeah.
And they also had something called the Phoenix program in Vietnam that the U.S. military was running, and it was to destroy the civilian support of the Viet Cong resistance. And the civilian support is how the Viet Cong survived, because they provided them with food and shelter and whatever support they needed. And so the U.S. military set up torture camps, assassination teams, you name it. If it was nasty and terroristic, they were using it in Vietnam to destroy the civilian support of the Viet Cong resistance. Now, what was the what was the Vietnam War really about? It was about securing a new drug source for opium and heroin. And that's because they had been producing opium in Turkey, and Turkey shut it down. So they staged, the Jesuits are behind the Vietnam War to secure new opium sources. And the opium poppy grows in the foothills of the Himalayas, and they need cheap labor to harvest it. So that's what the Vietnam War was about, as well as doing programs, Project Popeye, weather modification, the Phoenix program, to set up the United States for a complete takedown. And that was always planned by the Jesuits from the time this country became an independent country.
Mm-hmm.
And so the chemtrails now that I'm seeing how they're using in the San Francisco Bay Area and the whole west coast of the United States is they are putting chemicals in the drinking water. They are putting aluminum particles, chemicals, pathogens, radioactive particles. They're putting a whole cocktail of deadly chemicals and radiation and particulates in the chemtrails over the Bay Area. And they are spraying 7 layers of planes at different altitudes with different chemicals on the same time.
Oh, wow.
And this is day after day after day. And one of the planes that we've been seeing, which flies at the lowest altitude, it's barely above the treetops, they are spraying something that completely disappears in 7 seconds. It's so volatile. So it's something like benzene or some nasty chemical that combines with the other chemicals that they're spraying at other altitudes. And then all of a sudden it rains, or we have a real moist fog or drizzle or whatever, because we're right on the ocean. And every time I go out, Desiree, without a hat and fully covered, I come back with a staph infection. Little pustules start appearing all along my hairline. Oh. If I don't wear a hat and protect my head and face and skin. And if I go outside barefooted, and you can see the chemtrails, they leave a shiny surface on the roadways and on sidewalks. Okay.
Coming up again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Just wait a sec for...
Correct. I'm transitioning also.
He's switching over cameras now, too.
Okay.
So, your picture hasn't come back on.
No.
Did you turn your camera off?
Yeah, my camera, it's on now, and yours is working at coming back.
Yeah.
So, yeah, last thing I heard was that you had the pustules along your hairline.
Yes. Did you hear it when I said I had them on my feet?
No, you were just starting on your talking on your feet, but the video is not back yet, so I can't record it yet. We have to just wait a second.
Okay, take your time.
I've got common shoes.
It is working, but it's way worse at your place than it is here, by the way.
It's very, very bad here. It's because they're breaking down the whole North America.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to be one big slave camp.
Yeah.
And Janet Napolitano, when she was with Homeland Security, when she was the chief, she went to 15 Commonwealth countries and sold them contracts to have FEMA and Homeland Security in those countries.
Oh, lovely,
Our Homeland Security and our FEMA are now operating in other countries, including Germany, where
you're going again.
They work at the airport and they just passenger they want to. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, well, the sound was getting funny again.
Yeah.
You said she was in Germany.
The background, what's happening to you?
Yeah, it's okay. We're recording all the interference too.
Yeah. Homeland Security is also in Germany. That is what I picked up. Yeah.
Yes. Janet Napolitano made contracts with other countries, Commonwealth countries. Now, Germany is not a Commonwealth country, but we have 45 U.S. military bases in Germany.
Yes, I know.
And we control. Look what they've done to poor Angela Merkel. They've just destroyed her career in just a few weeks, a few months. They're blackmailing her. They're doing all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's the same old. Germany needs to be demolished as well, because that's what happened with World War I and World War II.
I know.
Yeah. I know. That whole history is also totally different from what people think it is.
What is?
The history of World War I and World War II.
Oh, I know. It's not the fairy tale that people think it is. That's
exactly,
right.
Yes. And when you say something about that to people, then they stare at you as if you're, some sort of monster or something.
I discovered that the first time I discovered the staph infection was coming out of the chemtrails was when I discovered a ring of pustules that are staph on my foot.
Staphylococcus. Yeah.
Yes, staphylococcus.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the only place I know that you can catch it is in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very unusual outside of hospitals. So when I saw that, I was really puzzled. And I remembered that I had gone out to pick up the mail one day barefooted. And then I noticed them another time when I went outside without a hat. This is over the last year. And I got the pustules around my hairline. And you just put iodine on them and it's dead in 5 seconds. It's very easy to get rid of with iodine.
Uh-huh.
And that goes right through your skin. If you get styes on your eyes, that's staphylococcus. You just put the iodine, dilute it, and just wipe it around your eyes, and that goes away right away.
We only have the 3% iodine these days.
Oh, we get 10%.
Oh, yeah, well.
It's called povidone iodine, but you go to the pharmacist and you ask him to order it for you. And for one 1 ounce tube, it's like in a
glass tube. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in an ointment.
Mm-hmm.
It's only $3 or something, maybe 1.5 euros or 2 euros, and that lasts a very, very long time.
Yeah. Okay.
So I went out barefooted another time, and I got these huge watery blisters about this big.
Whoa.
All over the bottom of my feet, and they turned black. And I said, this has to be out of the chemtrails. I've never had this on my feet or my body ever. So I decided not to hang any more clothes outside, not to leave any shoes or boots or coats or anything outside. And we don't allow the cat outside anymore because he would go out and he'd come back in and have a runny nose and a cold the next day. So they are definitely putting chemicals, radiation, and pathogens.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
In the chemtrails. And then they're doing things, putting chemicals in the drinking water in the Bay Area. They are pumping ozone, which is very toxic, into black community neighborhoods to increase the death rate targeting black communities.
Oh, wow. But in what way do they put that in the black communities? In the air or in the water or what?
No, they pump it out as a gas, and it's like a ground fog. It doesn't go up into the air. It sort of stays on the ground like a ground fog.
Oh.
And they keep it in the black neighborhoods and away from the white neighborhoods and the subway stations and everything by using antenna transmissions to heat up the air. So you get a high pressure air, warm air that borders the neighborhood you're targeting, and you pump that ozone into the neighborhood, and it stays behind those warm air kind of fences.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So it's all invisible. It's all fluid dynamics. You can't believe what they're doing now. This is the most perverted form of science, of life, of religion, of everything. It goes against everything we know.
It's Tuskegee on steroids.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Whoa. Well, and with the chemtrails, we have them here as well. I made a lot of pictures of them. And today, a friend of mine in another area in the Netherlands, she said there was a huge Star of David in the sky.
I've been waiting for this. These are called holograms, and I even know the Army colonel His nickname is Penguin. He's in this weird group of strange psychopathic army officers, and they sit around dreaming stuff like this up. They went to Mongolia and they spent time in Tibet with the priests, the monks, and learned their secrets. They went to South America to shamans and learned the medicines, and then they take it and weaponize it and use it to make profits and to kill people instead of to heal them.
Yeah.
And so these chemtrails have been developed at the nuclear weapons labs in the United States. They are spraying them in Argentina, Brazil, European countries. I've had reports they were spraying them over islands in the Caribbean.
Hawaii.
And people would come back sick. They've been doing it in Hawaii. They're doing it all over the world. And it is for depopulation.
Yeah.
And another thing I believe they're putting in the chemtrails now, because I saw the students on the UC Berkeley campus getting Department of Defense money from the military to develop something called smartdust, and it was 1 cubic millimeter that they called it dust, but it actually had a video camera and a computer in it, and they were spreading, the students who were making it were testing it and spreading it all over the campus, and they got caught because they were putting it where students walk back and forth all day long, and they were using it to look under women's dresses and skirts. And I believe that it is now nanoparticle size and that it's a component in the chemtrails. Yeah. And so people are inhaling it, ingesting it, it's going through their skin, and it's lodging in the tissues and the cells of the body, and it's transmitting and receiving signals and algorithms and commands and so forth.
Yeah.
I am certain that's where smartdust ended up.
Yeah, it's logical. If you think like the devil, you would do it too.
Yes, and they can also use it to monitor radiation levels,
yeah.
the dose response in people.
Yeah.
And I know that Cheney, during the 2003 Iraq War, sent an Italian journalist named Ficino to Iraq, and he had Cheney's private phone number. He called him anytime he wanted to and got him on the phone. And Cheney went to Iraq and met with him and introduced him to the U.S. military. And he was there as a journalist, of all things, collecting radiation samples all over Iraq to be sent to Cheney to have them analyzed so that he knew which areas to rebomb with the nuclear weapons we used in Iraq, so that the desired kill rate was achieved. He did the same thing. Cheney did the same thing with Ficino. He sent him to Gaza. When do you remember when Obama came in the first time and was inaugurated and sworn in as president? As soon as he did that swearing in, Israel started bombing and attacking Gaza. And Cheney had Ficino in Gaza collecting samples and sending those to Cheney because they were using radioactive materials.
Well, I guess by now the whole world is being toxic, is being made toxic.
Yes.
In that sense.
Yes.
I mean, Chernobyl, I'm not sure whether that was an accident or anything.
No, it was a false flag. An admiral in India, the top admiral, told me confidentially, quietly, that he had inspected nuclear power plants all over Russia, and he said Chernobyl was a false flag. He said it was carried out to end the Cold War.
which was a farce anyway, but yeah.
Which was a false flag anyway, exactly.
Yeah.
And the big joke is that the whole time Russia and the U.S. were these Soviets, were these pretend enemies, the Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah.
They were secretly collaborating all through the Cold War to make HAARP.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Not many people believe that, but I came across that information also. Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and it's amazing how little people know or are aware of things, because it was April 9, 2012, I think it was, that I presented in a hearing of the European Union Parliament.
Yes.
I gave a presentation, 10 minutes, on the health effects of chemtrails.
Yes.
And there was a member of Parliament there, when I said that it poisoned the world of our grandchildren.
Yes.
He suddenly sort of woke up. And when he closed the meeting, he said, I have learned so much today. And then he looked straight at me, because I had seen the coin drop with him. Boing!
Yes.
Holy cow, my grandson also.
Yes.
So he woke up, but so many people still have no clue about chemtrails. And like I always say, like how we have new money, we have the euro now. We used to have guilders, and now we have this stupid euro. You can never see which coin is which. It's a mess. But there are children now in Holland who have never seen a guilder.
Yeah.
And there are people now on this earth who have never seen a clear summer sky.
Yes, that's right. And if you go and collect books on weather, you can see when they started changing the names of clouds, and they were slipping into the chemtrail clouds.
Yeah.
And giving them new names,
Yes.
and the normal clouds were disappearing from the weather books.
Yeah. In Belgium I gave a presentation on chemtrails, and I started with a 16th century painting of how clouds were supposed to look like.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. So it's just very, very important, I think, to educate people about these things, and then they do begin to notice them.
Yes, as soon as you say, hey, haven't you noticed that? That is a chemtrail.
Yes.
What's that? They sort of look at you like, whoa, what's this?
Yeah.
And then you explain what it is, and then you can see how difficult it is for people to take that message in. And also because people generally are loving people. I mean, they themselves would not think of doing a thing like that. So they can't know, they can't understand that other people, or people, sort of people, do these things.
Well, what can we do about them now that we've talked about them and introduced this to the conversation? I think we need to give an answer, or what can people do about it so they don't feel helpless. The most important thing is to keep your pets indoors, and any friends or family members should always be covered, all areas of skin, whether it's summer or winter. And also to stay out of the rain for a couple of weeks when the rainy season starts. Now, generally it starts, I live in California, so it's a Mediterranean climate, as they have in the Mediterranean region. So we have from May until November, we have no rain at all. So it's just very, very important, I think, to educate people about these things, and then they do begin to notice them.
Yes, as soon as you say, hey, haven't you noticed that? That is a chemtrail.
Yes.
What's that? They sort of look at you like, whoa, what's this?
Yeah.
And then you explain what it is, and then you can see how difficult it is for people to take that message in. And also because people generally are loving people. I mean, they themselves would not think of doing a thing like that. So they can't know, they can't understand that other people, or people, sort of people, do these things.
Well, what can we do about them now that we've talked about them and introduced this to the conversation? I think we need to give an answer, or what can people do about it so they don't feel helpless. The most important thing is to keep your pets indoors, and any friends or family members should always be covered. All areas of skin, whether it's summer or winter. And also to stay out of the rain for a couple of weeks when the rainy season starts. Now, generally it starts, I live in California, so it's a Mediterranean climate, as they have in the Mediterranean region. So we have from May until November, we have no rain at all for 6 months. And then California only has an average of 12 inches to 14 inches of rain a year. We have desert, we have alpine, mountains, we have shoreline, we have all of the climates and the microclimates and the topography and the terrain and geography that makes it such an interesting and diverse environment, and the natural history here in California is wonderful. It's just wonderful, and it's because of all the different environments that have been created by the topography and geography. And I forgot what why I was talking about that.
We were trying to give advice about what people can do, not feeling helpless.
So the main thing is to cover the skin at all times. Even in the summertime, you should wear long sleeves that cover your hands, or you can put real thin latex gloves on, like surgeons use when you go out. It's not so noticeable. But you need to be fully covered, and especially the head, to keep the chemtrail materials, chemicals and everything out of your hair and off the skin on your face and neck. And that's the most important thing. And then when you come back to the house, take your shoes off and leave them by the front door. Put a cardboard box or some kind of a container so that you're not tracking that chemtrail material residue all over your house. And you just don't want to take your pets out to leave them outside, minimize the time outside, and you might even wipe the paws off when you bring them back in the house with diluted iodine, and that just cleans any pathogens off, and it helps mitigate the chemicals also.
Okay.
So I hope that helps people, gives them an idea on how to protect themselves. Their diet is very important. We are being bombarded daily with the fresh fission products and the radiation from Fukushima. That is being released every single day into the air, into the ocean water, and it's being transported around the entire planet, all of the oceans. It travels 5 to 10 miles an hour. So it gets into a current in Japan, it goes into the North Pacific, then it comes down through Southeast Asia. It goes down around Africa, and then up the Atlantic along the African coast. It travels on the surface there, goes up to the Irish Sea and the British Isles, and then it dives down very deep in the mid-Atlantic and goes right back around in this loop and into the Pacific. So it's transporting the radiation from Fukushima all over the oceans. And this mixing happens very quickly. We have very, very cold poles on this planet and a very hot equator. So that very cold air and very hot air want to mix and equilibrate. They want to come to one temperature that's the same everywhere. And so the greater the difference in temperature between the equator and the poles causes more violent mixing of that cold and hot air. And something anybody can do to demonstrate this to your children or in a classroom or just to yourself, you get 2 big plastic bottles that, water comes in, or soda pop or whatever, carbonated drinks, and you put cold water in one and you put warm water in the other, and you put dye in one of them, just a few drops of blue dye. And then you put a piece of paper on top of one of the bottles, you turn it over holding the paper, and you put that bottle on top of the other bottle, the open spout on top of the open spout, and you pull the paper out. And you can see how this mixing happens really fast.
Yeah.
And if you just do warm water, it mixes more slowly than if you use hot water.
Yeah.
And that demonstrates the violence, the turbulence of the mixing. So that temperature difference is how they increase the energy in storms, in hurricanes, in tornadoes. And what they do with HAARP is to transmit a beam down into a vortex of a hurricane or a tornado or a typhoon, and they drag it like a magic wand over water if they want heat to go up and make it more violent, or they drag it over cold water if they want to calm down the turbulence in that vortex.
So there is no storm that is not artificial anymore.
Well, we can't make those storms. They have to wait for those to form naturally. And all of the hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean come from vortexes that start in the Sahara Desert, where you have very cold nights and very hot days, and you get that hot and cold air mixing again. It starts vortexes in the Mediterranean that move out into the Atlantic, and then they go over. The Atlantic is pretty warm, so they can increase their turbulence, but they go across the Atlantic and then partly go down the coast of South America, but most of them go into the Caribbean, and they rain out all along the Gulf Coast states, and then they go up the east side of the United States, the Atlantic seaboard, and the highest diabetes rates in the United States are in Puerto Rico and along those Gulf Coast states, where that rain out of all the depleted uranium and the nuclear weapons they're using in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now in Ukraine, it's rained out along the coastline. And that's why in Europe or other countries, you want to stay inside as much as you can for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the rainy season, because the highest concentration of radiation in the air is all being rained out then. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And when Israel attacked Lebanon, I think it was 2005 in the summertime. I put press releases out that went all over the world, and I said there's going to be a very large increase in diabetes in Israel as soon as the rainy season starts. And I knew they had a Mediterranean climate. So I got the rainfall patterns, and I got the graphs of the annual rainfall by month, and the highest rainfall in Israel is on the northern part where the border of Lebanon is, because it's very mountainous there. And sure enough, the first newspaper article came out in December of 2005, 4 or 5 months after the attack on Lebanon, and they had an epidemic of diabetes in children in Israel, and it was in that area in the northern part of Israel bordering with Lebanon. And then we got bomb crater samples all along that border between Lebanon and Israel, and they had fourth generation nuclear weapons inside the depleted uranium bombs. So it was 2 nuclear wars in the same bomb. And these were analyzed at Harwell, which is the British government radiation laboratory. Dr. Chris Busby had them collected, and then he had them analyzed there. And he just didn't tell them where he got the samples from. He just said, tell me what's in these samples. And there it was, neutron, fourth generation nuclear weapons.
Whoa.
And they're the size of a matchbox or an orange. Very small. And the neutron bombs damage living systems. The exposed population gets nuked, but the infrastructure is not damaged by the neutrons.
Yeah.
And so you have all kinds of biological effects. They used them all over Fallujah, and the infant mortality and the birth defects are horrific now in the cities where they use them, but particularly Fallujah.
Yeah, it is beyond me how people can consciously do these things.
We're talking about the Jesuits.
Yeah.
And the Jesuits are a military order.
Mm-hmm.
Many people, including Napoleon, have made that very, very clear. And the Jesuits are not Catholics. They probably don't even believe in religion.
About chemtrails.
Yes.
Yes, that is a way of distributing all sorts of stuff. And it's used for different things. And you say, for instance, that puffy clouds, every puffy cloud might have a different electromagnetic frequency. So what does that do? Why is that? What do they do with that?
Well, let me establish right here from the very beginning that chemtrails have always had a military application.
Yeah.
And so when the U.S. started doing nuclear bomb tests out in the Pacific, open air testing, they did them in the Marshall Islands. And the Bikini nuclear bomb test was an especially large one. And so the Navy had 95 ships in the Bikini Lagoon and around in the islands around there to do observations. And these are huge ships full of thousands of men. Well, they didn't know what the biological effects of ionizing radiation would be. And basically the Navy didn't care because they wanted to develop them for weapons. So no one was told or warned or anything. And what occurred is that when these bombs went off, they had a huge electromagnetic pulse that disturbed the configuration of the different parts of the troposphere and the atmosphere and the ionosphere, and so their radio frequencies and transmissions that normally bounce off of the atmosphere were upset or just disturbed, so they couldn't even talk to each other. There was no communication for 2 weeks until the atmosphere came back into its normal state.
Yeah.
And so they said, wow, we can weaponize that.
How interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
God.
And so the research started on how to make artificial electromagnetic mirrors when they needed them, if the regular one didn't work or for special purposes. And they started spraying chemicals, metal particulates especially, in the atmosphere, and then experimenting on transmitting frequencies. And what they learned is that if they had a series of these some distance apart, they could actually transmit line of sight or straight frequencies, radio beams. They could point them at these mirrors and they would bounce down to the ground, and they would be captured and retransmitted to the next one, so that they could actually transmit straight line frequencies around the world.
Yeah, like that, yeah.
Yeah, a zigzag,
circle.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Zigzag
So
circle.
bouncing them off the ground, bouncing them off of chemtrail mirrors, and I read about this in a U.S. Air Force, I think, or U.S. Army publication, and they had a diagram showing exactly how they did it, and they gave the frequencies and everything, and there were a number of puffy clouds, like small ones, like powder puffs or cotton balls, and in this report it said that each one of them was a different frequency. So they would be using them for different frequencies. And I saw a live demonstration of them over the fault zone when the great earthquake occurred in China just before the Olympics. And I saw these puffy balls of chemtrails over the fault zone, and they were shimmering. They were noctilucent or shimmering, and they were using those, the HARP and whoever the Western powers were using HARP, to trigger that major earthquake in China, and it almost bankrupted China. It took a lot of money away from the Olympics that they had to spend on disaster response. So it attacked their the prestige, the world prestige and everything that they should have had for putting on Olympics that weren't as grand and comfortable as they had planned them to be, because the money had to be spent on disaster relief.
Oh, yeah.
So then another purpose of chemtrails, these are all early programs that are relevant today, was when the U.S. and the Soviet Union were secretly developing HARP during the Cold War. They needed, no one knew what the Earth's magnetic field was about. They didn't know anything about the ionosphere because they had no way to go up there and study it. And no one had been that interested in it anyway. But they wanted to develop HARP as a global radio frequency radar weapon. Mm-hmm. And so a scientist at Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, his name was Dr. Christophilus, said, well, if we did nuclear bombs in the atmosphere, they would inject highly charged radioactive particles into the Van Allen belts, which are the Earth's magnetic field way up in the atmosphere. And we could study how those particles behave in the field lines, and that will tell us how we can weaponize the ionosphere and make this global weapon. So how do you get those particles up there into the ionosphere? Well, they decided to shoot them in canisters in missiles that would explode in the ionosphere and release all these radioactive particles and other chemicals. And so then they had a rocket or a missile program to inject them. And they also used the space shuttle. When nuclear bomb testing ended, they developed the space shuttle, the space station, and the space program. And I found at least 10 press releases from the Navy Research Lab, NRL. It's all on the internet if you Google it. And I discovered that they had been using the space shuttle to blow carbon and radioactive particles out of the exhaust manifolds into the ionosphere. So those, you see, are very direct military applications.
Yeah.
Now, the chemtrails program for spraying humanity in countries all over the world deliberately without their permission or informing them is now fully underway, and this came out of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And it was called Project Popeye.
Yeah, how they inundated the Ho Chi Minh Route. Yeah.
Yes, and they began manipulating the weather for military advantages, to cut off supplies getting to the Viet Cong. But
that was cloud seeding, it was called at the time.
That was cloud seeding, right. But it was that was spraying metal particulates into air masses, which is exactly what chemtrails is.
Yes, yeah.
It was just the beginning. It was the proto-study.
1965 or something, huh? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what that has turned into is a program today in 2014 that, how long ago did the chemtrails start to be noticeable? 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah, 1995, 6, something like that.
Okay, that is, 1995 is the year when very high magnitude earthquakes, 8.5, 7.5 to 8.5 or higher, began to happen exponentially.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, there's this huge increase in 1 year, starting in 1995. And I did a lot of research, and what I discovered is that ARCO, the Atlantic Richfield Oil Company, had conducted the HAARP research at the what was then a research laboratory out in Livermore, California, and later on it was they gave it to the Department of Energy to build the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab there, and then they developed HAARP there, and they had a civilian scientist working for ARCO named Dr. Bernard Eastland.
Oh, yeah.
And ARCO came to him and said, look, we want you to develop some kind of a program that we can look for oil deposits and mineral deposits from satellites in space.
Oh, that was it, yes.
And
right.
that was it. That was the beginning. So he developed a program, an application, the science, for doing mineral exploration from satellites. And you can do it with a 30-watt signal. That's about as strong as a light bulb in a sewing machine, and penetrate 150 feet into the ground, and 150 miles. And
nice.
They can also scan across the ore body from a satellite and they can map the grade ore, how much gold or zinc or copper is in across the whole deposit. And then they can estimate how much they would make from mining that deposit. And it's 100% accurate. So I'm a geoscientist. We used to put boots on and pick up our rock hammers, put our khaki clothes on and our backpacks and go out in the field and map ore bodies and do ore exploration. Well, you know, you have to fly somewhere around the world to where the ore body is and do that. It's under very rugged conditions, civil wars and hostile inhabitants impede that, and it's so much easier and cleaner and sneakier from a satellite, right? Because
lazier too.
Doing it.
Yeah.
And Bechtel, an engineering firm that started in San Francisco, is a Jesuit operation, and they have already mapped many of the ore deposits from space all over the world, including Antarctica. And so Bernard Eastland had in the patent application for one of his HARP patents, he's the one who described and proposed shooting these rockets into the ionosphere with chemicals.
Yeah.
Now, in 1995, the 14 key patents for HARP, including 4 or 5 patents that Bernard Eastland had his name on, those patents held by the CIA were handed off to BAE in England, British Aeronautical Enterprises. And that's a very secret, very dangerous organization to work for because many people have been murdered. I've talked to people who've been harassed out of the country who worked for them, and then they never had a peaceful life anywhere they went.
Oh, yeah.
So then, following that, other applications that Bernard Eastland described were, or that he held, were uses for HARP was mind control, ballistic missile defense, many other applications. But it's interesting that you just said the chemtrails started in about 1995. They've got to be coming out of Britain is the headquarters for HARP, and it's British Petroleum, and it's owned personally by Queen Elizabeth, plus she owns the controlling interest of Royal Dutch Shell. The Dutch royal family owns the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so there it is. But it's interesting that you just said the chemtrails started in about 1995. They've got to be coming out of Britain is the headquarters for HARP, and it's British Petroleum, and it's owned personally by Queen Elizabeth, plus she owns the controlling interest of Royal Dutch Shell. The Dutch royal family owns the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so there it is. It's the Jesuits hiding behind the British Petroleum front that are guiding, planning, they developed, and the purpose only they know, but I know it's, you and I know it's depopulation for the chemtrails.
And also Elizabeth, or the British Crown, owns the uranium mines all over the place.
Queen Elizabeth, because she is a sovereign queen, a sovereign ruler, along with about 25 others around the world, they own the mineral rights to their kingdoms. She owns all the mineral rights to the Commonwealth. And so she can send drilling rigs onto any farm, ranch, anybody's backyard in the Commonwealth and mine, prospect for minerals, drill holes, do fracking, and you can't say anything about it because in the Commonwealth, people, when they purchase property, are buying the first 12 inches of dirt.
Yeah, the top. And the rest is not yours, yeah.
No, the rest is not yours, and there's no way to stop her. And that's what the Scottish referendum for independence from England was about. They used HARP to flip the elections.
Yes, it was rigged.
Queen Elizabeth retained her vassal state, Scotland, and there was lots of ballot box stuffing and all kinds of dirty stuff going on. And it was David Cameron who carried that out for Queen Elizabeth. So HARP and frequencies have also been used, chemtrails, in elections. HARP and chemtrails were used in Rwanda when that horrific massacre occurred and every white person in that country was slaughtered. The Hutus and the Tutsis were fighting with fighting with each other, but an infamous world war crimes agent was caught recently in the Ukraine last summer. His name is Yuri Selchevich or something like that. And he actually described what happened there. He was sent there from the Ukraine with a gang of people who had been neuropsychological, linguistic programming. Yeah. They were connected through their heads to computers and trained and filled with algorithms to kill.
Like robots.
Yes, like robots. And he arrived with this team he was the head of, and he described there had been chemtrails sprayed over the country for weeks before he arrived and other war criminals arrived. And the radio, there were radio antennas set up all over Rwanda, and when they were ready to start this massacre, the transmitters transmitted radio frequencies and that turned on the kill, the aggression
modus,
moods. Yeah. And suddenly white mothers were killing their children, their babies, murdering their husbands. They were murdering each other. They were murdering neighbors. And it was just a bloodbath the whole time. And Yuri described the oligarchs, criminal oligarchs in Russia and Eastern Europe who had been behind that Rwanda massacre. And it was to clean out the assets of all the wealthy white people, the colonists. The blacks were used as the cover story, but they weren't interested in them because they don't own anything.
Yeah.
And nobody was ever the wiser. But Yuri was captured in Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine, in this separatist movement that has been going on for a year. In Novorossiya, what we call Novorossiya, New Russia, which is the eastern part where a lot of Cossacks live. And they have traditionally been the Russian army. They've been army and great warriors wherever they are. And Yuri had an Interpol bounty on his head of $5 million.
Ooh.
And part of the Ukrainian army was fed up with the Ukrainian government war that is illegal. They're using illegal weapons, depleted uranium and other illegal weapons. And so 15 or 20,000 soldiers have left the Ukrainian army and walked across the battlefield and joined the pro-Russian resistance that's trying to separate from the Ukraine because they're being genocided. They have no choice. And as a gift to the militia, the volunteers in the resistance movement, they brought Yuri tied up as a gift. And I don't know what happened to him, but I hope they turned him over to Interpol and got the $5 million bounty.
and the story has been going on in Rwanda. But people can, yeah, well, this is Jose Delgado's science in the field on steroids.
Yes, it is.
Ugh.
Yes, it is. And you know, he's Spanish. He was born in Spain. He's a U.S. Army colonel. He's in his 80s, and he is still obsessed with doing this research. They die obsessed with this insanity.
Yeah.
And this technology, the biology of aggression, is being transmitted all over the Ukraine, all over the United States, countries all over the world. And now with the HARP stations in Antarctica, Britain has at least 9 HARP stations in Antarctica. Yeah. Japan has 3.
But there is a whole network over the whole world. I have a map where you can see all the lines going all over the world.
Yes, there is. And it's around the equator also. The countries in the equatorial zone have HARP facilities. Yeah. And it's to control the circulatory meridian around the equatorial region that controls climate and droughts and floods and everything. And they can cause horrific droughts. Remember a few years ago when Europe and Russia had horrible droughts and they lost all their grain. And that same equatorial meridian was stalled. Instead of circulating and mixing the air and making a more even climate, it's stalled so that hot zones stayed over certain areas, regions that never got that hot, and burned up the crops. And we had it happen in Oklahoma, in the middle part of America here. That same meridian was stalled here and wiped out the crops here. So these are horrific weapons and horrific concepts that most people believe are natural disasters.
Well, it certainly is in line with what I have read of the extreme oath of the Jesuits, because that is, well,
a nightmare.
Yeah, it's satanic. It's crazy.
It is calling for depopulation of the entire planet, and what they believe is that whatever they want to do is perfectly fine to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and let the public not confuse Jesuits with religion, because they have one religion, probably Satanism.
They're atheists. They don't believe in religion.
Exactly.
They don't believe in God.
No, so...
And I'll give you a really good example of one. I was investigating the top of the Jesuits. I've been doing this for a few months. And I wanted to know who is at the top of the Jesuits dictating all these programs and controlling the entire world. And this has been going on since the mid-1500s. And I was able to get a copy online of a biography of the Farnese family in Italy. And the Farnese family is a very interesting family. They're one of the papal families, a family with popes, Roman popes, who have intermarried and who controlled the Jesuits. In fact, the Farneses, Alessandro Farnese in the mid-1500s, came out of northern Italy and was sent to Rome to help the Borgia Pope, and he sure did help him, because Alessandro was 17 when he was sent to Rome, and he was a full cardinal by the time he was 24 years old.
Yeah.
He was Pope of Rome. He was Pope Paul III 40 years later. And Alessandro was very, very interesting. He started the Jesuits with a little help from the Francis Borgia, and he set about establishing a military organization, which the Jesuits are, and they don't even believe in God. They're basically atheists, but they use religion as a disguise. These nice
yeah.
And they come in like a lamb, and the practicing as if they're humble religious agents or priests has given them access to very, very vulnerable people. And they also introduced the ritual of confession, where people go once a week to the priest, the village priest, and they confess what they've done or their sins or tell gossip or whatever about the villages and the towns. And it was actually set up as a mechanism for the Jesuits to gather information, intelligence on the lowliest people to the highest people across the world, the Catholic world. And so Alessandro Farnese set up the Jesuits. He also built a pentagon-shaped war edifice, a very, very large structure, bigger than a building. And it was in a pentagon shape, and it was open in the center so they could have huge fires. And I think they probably could cast brass and make cannons and other weapons. It was for a military purpose. And but his grandson, also named Alessandro Cardinal Farnese, he finished that structure or added a number of floors to it in a pentagon shape, and that became the party house of the Farneses, the Villa Farnese. But it was actually war rooms to plan all of the wars in Europe from the time of Alessandro Farnese, the Cardinal Farnese. And there was even a room in it, there is a room in it which is called the map room, and there are maps painted all over the walls. And I started getting really interesting about these people because I learned that the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., which is the military headquarters, the infamous military headquarters for the United States, was built on the plan of the Villa Farnese in Italy, and that the Farneses had had the capital of Canada burned down after the War of 1812, and the very next day the capital of Washington, D.C. was burned down, and they renamed the cities, and they also rebuilt the cities in the style and the planning that they wanted. If you can believe that, it's absolutely true. And in Washington, D.C., they still own and control the Pentagon, Washington Monument, Congress. 10% of the members of Congress are Jesuits. And the signs and symbols are all over Washington, D.C., and these are ancient Sumerian and Babylonian symbols and Parthian, Persian symbols from the First World Empire of Persia. And the Farneses were not Jews, and they were not Catholics. They were and are Zoroastrians who worship Mithra, and those are the Iranian tribes that came from Central Asia. Well, the Farneses lived originally in Cappadocia, which is what Eastern Turkey, and it was part of the Parthian or Persian Empire at that time. And then they moved on to Italy, and they started 12 Etruscan cities in Italy, and then the Etruscans were destroyed, and the Roman Empire was built on top of the Etruscan cities. And the Farneses, of course, were involved in the building of the Roman Empire. So this is sort of a long story, but now I'm going to come to who they really are. They were made the Dukes of Parma, Piacenza, and the Dukes of Castro. And they were the first dukes of all three of those titles because Pope Paul III wanted to make his family a ducal family, and he made them very rich by taking papal estates and giving them to his oldest son, Pier Luigi Farnese, who became the Duke of Parma and the Duke of Castro. And so I was looking at all these pictures and everything, and I said, gee, I wonder if Fidel Castro in Cuba is a Farnese. So I took Castro's picture, and I put it next to Pope Paul III and a painting of Pier Luigi in his military armor, and his son, Alessandro Farnese, the cardinal. And oh my God, Fidel Castro is absolutely from that bloodline. He looks exactly like them, and this is over 500 years after they were alive. And I said, well, they've got a breeding program then. And they are not Jews. They are Parthians. They're Persians.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at these big noses on the popes at that time, and I said, well, since they're Central Asian, that big nose must be typical of a particular tribe. And I looked at all the tribes, and I was able to identify the Uzbek tribes had those big characteristic noses that the popes at that time had. So, so this is very, very interesting that Castro's father came. He supposedly was a poor agricultural worker from Spain who migrated to Cuba, but he suddenly had an 11,000-acre sugar plantation, and he married a very, very wealthy woman. Well, he also had 5 children with his cook or housekeeper or something at the same time. And Castro was one of the younger illegitimate children of that union that his father had. And so when Castro was growing up, he was sent to all Jesuit academies and schools. And he also married a very, very wealthy woman and had a son, his heir, Fidelito, which means little Fidel, because it's like his father. And these are the people who are planning to enslave the entire planet, depopulate the entire planet, and poisoning were their favorite method of killing lots of people or individual enemies. And Castro himself was not baptized or christened a Catholic until he was 8. He became an atheist, a communist, and then he became a Marxist. So he's not a religious person. He was never interested in social issues or social interactions. He actually had, he always was the leader of a gang from the time he was in sort of middle school age, 12 or something, 10. And he also murdered his enemies or students he was in competition with. And he had no qualms about murdering students in high school. So he has a very, very dark past. And after I discovered this, he's from the line of the Duke of Castro, the Dukes of Castro. And so he's directly descended from Pope Paul and Pierluigi Farnese. And then I dug into where his father came from in Spain. Well, it's in Galicia, which is the Gaelic part of Spain. And he was from the city that has the finest Roman walls still intact in the world. And then I dug some more because that Roman connection was there. And it said he originally came from Piacenza in Italy. And of course, his family were the Dukes of Piacenza. So there is the story of Fidel Castro. He's an Italian duke and a Spanish prince.